Islamic terrorists kill at least 15 people in Bondi Beach, plus a mass shooting at Brown University, and Rob Reiner and his wife murdered in Los Angeles. A dark day across the board. Also, in 10 days, episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, begin streaming for Daily Wire Plus All Access members. No one else is bold enough to make something like this. Nobody was going to bring this legend to life with the scale and conviction it deserves. It's big, it's demanding, and it's risky. But we built this company to do this sort of thing. And now we're doing the same thing with entertainment. Big, audacious moves. Christmas Day All Access members see episodes 1 and 2 before anyone else. January 22nd, the 7-part epic launches for all our members. The wait is almost over. The moment Rise of the Merlin hits your screen, you're going to understand exactly why we went this big. Become a Daily Wire Plus member right now during our Christmas sale. Get 40% off new annual memberships at dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, on Sunday, the worst shooting attack in modern Australian history happened. It was a terror attack against the Jewish community in Australia. According to the Wall Street Journal, 2 gunmen killed 15 people during a Hanukkah event Sunday on Sydney's Bondi Beach in what officials called a terrorist attack on Australia's Jewish community. One suspect was killed. The other is in critical condition. It was the country's worst mass shooting in nearly 30 years. Authorities increased the death toll after a 10-year-old girl and a 40-year-old man died in the hospital. Over 3 dozen people were injured as well, some seriously, including 2 police officers. Apparently, the suspects were a father and a son who legally owned 6 guns, despite the firearms laws in Australia, which are indeed incredibly restrictive. The 2 shooters were, of course, radical Muslims. They stormed the family-friendly Hanukkah, according to the New York Post. It's called the Hanukkah by the Sea event, and it was run by the Chabad. Chabad is basically a Jewish outreach organization. They exist in a lot of cities all over the world, including in places where there are not a lot of Jews, especially during Hanukkah. They tend to do these sort of big public events in public areas. They have them, again, all over the United States, all over Europe, all over the world, including in Sydney. And all it is just people getting together and eating latkes and lighting the menorah and celebrating with each other. And this is apparently one of the most Jewish areas of Sydney. Bondi Beach, the area right around it, is a very Jewish area. And 2 radical Muslims, father and son, united by hatred of Jews, decided that they would show up and just start blowing people away. They were armed with shotguns and a bolt-action rifle. They killed at least 15. They injured at least 40 more, according to the New York Post and the New South Wales police. The shooting went on for at least 20 minutes, apparently. 20 minutes of shooting. The police did pretty much nothing. We do have tape. The tape is, again, astonishing, difficult to show, because when you see the tape, what you see is people legitimately not doing their job. You see the police cowering in fear. You see the cops who, apparently there's a police station very nearby. They just didn't show up for whatever reason. Maybe it was out of fear. Maybe it was out of incompetence. But when you have a continuous mass shooting happening, and you have apparently at least 4 police officers present, and the police are doing nothing, you do have to ask some questions about the system in which this is existing. Apparently, as far as the firearm licenses go, according to the New South Wales Police Commissioner, Mal Lanyon, said he met the eligibility criteria for a firearms license. That would be the father, who was part of a gun club and held a recreational hunting license for over a decade. Apparently, he was a member of a gun club. He was entitled by nature of the Firearms Act to have a firearms license issued. It's very, very difficult to actually get a license for a firearm in Australia, but the father was able to get 6 firearms. They did a background check. Apparently, the background check did not include whether you are a radical Muslim in any real way. One of the people who was killed was a Holocaust survivor who was killed while shielding his wife in the middle of the attack. His name was Alex Kleitman, and he had traveled to Bondi Beach with his wife of 57 years for the Hanukkah event. Apparently, he decided, the Holocaust survivor, to protect his wife, and he was shot and killed as he lay on the ground on top of his wife, saving his wife in his final act. Eyewitness Arsen Ostrovsky, who was shot in the head but survived, was kind of grazed by a bullet. Here he was describing what he saw in the middle of the shooting.
Tell me what happened.
I was here with my family. It was a Hanukkah celebration. There were hundreds of people. There were children. There were elderly families enjoying themselves. Children, kids at a festival playing. And then all of a sudden it's absolute chaos. There's guns, fire everywhere. People ducking. It was absolute chaos. We didn't know what was happening, where the gunfire was coming from. I saw blood gushing in front of me. I saw people hit, saw people fall to the ground. My only concern was, where are my kids? Where are my kids? Where's my wife? Where's my family? I survived October 7th. I lived in Israel the last 13 years. We came here only 2 weeks ago to work with the Jewish community, to fight anti-Semitism, to fight this bloodthirsty, ravaging hatred.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. We've lived through worse. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get the bastards that did this.
Tell me, did you see the gunman?
I did. I saw at least one gunman firing. Looked like a shotgun, firing randomly in all directions. I saw children falling to the floor. So elderly. I saw invalids. I saw. People it was an absolute bloodbath, blood gushing everywhere. October 7th, that's the last time I saw this. I never thought I would see this in Australia, not in my lifetime.
On Bondi Beach?
On Bondi Beach, of all places, this iconic place.
Your children, your wife?
My children, my wife is safe, thank God. They're okay. They managed to get away. But I didn't know. I didn't know where they were, and that's nothing. There's no greater fear, no greater horror not knowing where your family is. They're okay. I'll be okay.
You're a legend. Thank you.
Now, again, this sort of attack, I would be lying if I said that Jews around the world don't expect this sort of thing to happen, especially in the aftermath of the radical increase in Islamic anti-Semitism and its presence all over the globe, and the increase of generalized anti-Semitism all over the globe. Not a gigantic shock that this happened. The only question is where. And of course, when you're talking about the presence of radical Muslims, you can't just talk about anti-Semitic terror attacks. Obviously, there have been a wide variety of terror attacks by radicalized Muslims all over the world, including in the United States, whether you're talking about the Pulse nightclub shooting, whether you're talking about the attack on 2 National Guard members just a couple of weeks ago in Europe, whether you're talking about radical Muslims who decide to drive trucks into Christmas markets. This has become a regular feature of Western life, attacks on people who are non-Muslim on the basis of their religion. This has become an unfortunate, recurrent feature of Western life because largely of the importation of radical Muslims and people who are then radicalized into the West. Mike Burgess, according to the Wall Street Journal, who leads Australia's domestic intelligence agency, said one of the suspects in Sunday's attack was known to the agency, but hadn't been considered an immediate threat. Police didn't say what ideology motivated the men, but I think it's a little clear when you show up to a Hanukkah by the Sea event and just start mowing people down, and you're a father and son team who attended the local mosque, and you have an IED, apparently several IEDs, in a vehicle nearby. I think we don't have to really guess too hard here. We really don't have to guess too hard. Jewish organization Chabad said among those killed was Eli Schlanger, the assistant rabbi at the organization's local branch and a key organizer of the Hanukkah by the Sea event. Police began receiving reports of shot fired around 6:47 p.m. local time on Sunday. Again, there were over 1,000 people there. 2 men dressed in black could be seen firing guns from a pedestrian bridge in a video posted on social media by the Australian Jewish Association. Again, the footage is quite awful, obviously, and the proximity was fairly close. One eyewitness, a man named Shmulik Scurry, described how there were police officers there, and they basically did nothing. They froze up.
Can you tell me what happened?
Yes, there was 2 shooters, one on the bridge, one under the bridge, and just started to shoot. For 20 minutes, they shoot, change magazine and just shoot. Simple as that. 20 minutes, was 4 policemen there, nobody gave fire back, nothing, like they are froze, it looked like 20 minutes, and they shoot, the guy changed magazine. I look at him all the time. I was 2 of my babies under me, and I look at that, and it's just rifle and a pistol, and just shoot.
Okay, now, again, the police did pretty much nothing, apparently, for a long time. There was one local hero who tried to do something. This actually was a Muslim bystander named Ahmed al-Ahmed, 43-year-old Muslim father of 2, showing that there are good people inside every religion. The question, of course, is whether when you import an enormous number of people of any particular religion, that changes the culture of the country, or whether it creates enclaves that are dangerous to the rest of the country. Okay, but that doesn't mean there aren't individuals who are wonderful people. Apparently, Ahmed al-Ahmed, one of the bystanders here, sounds like an amazing person. Here he is tackling one of the shooters. He takes away his gun. Now, one of the things that's astonishing about this video is he takes away the gun from the shooter, and then he points the gun at the shooter, and then he lets the shooter walk away. And I assume that is only because the gun laws in Australia are so insane that if he had shot the shooter, he might find himself under threat of prosecution. I mean, this is really quite nuts. Here is the video of the bystander saving people by disarming one of the terrorists.
Oh!
You can see he actually jumps on the shooter. He rips the gun away from him. The guy stumbles down, and then he points the gun at the shooter. You can hear the shots in the background. The other shooter is still standing on the bridge and firing at people and presumably murdering people. This guy then walks out of sight. It's not up to the bystander. Where are the cops? Where are the cops? According to the Times of Israel, dramatic footage showed the unarmed Ahmed wresting the weapon from one of the two gunmen before pointing the attacker's weapon at him. According to Ahmed's cousin, who shot twice in the arm during the altercation and was taken to a local hospital for surgery. Apparently, he had no experience with guns prior to the incident and was shot by the second gunman, who was perched on a nearby footbridge after succeeding in taking the gun from the first assailant. He was called by the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the pinnacle of heroism, and said, "We saw the action of a brave man, a brave Muslim, and I salute him for stopping one of the terrorists from killing innocent Jews," which, of course, is incredible and an act of heroism. President Trump, for his part, obviously came out with a very strong statement condemning hatred of Jews and urging American Jews to celebrate Hanukkah unabated.
Before we begin, however, I want to just pay my respects to the people. Unfortunately, 2 are no longer with us. Brown University, 9 injured, and 2 are looking down on us right now from heaven. And likewise in Australia, as you know, that was a terrible attack, 11 dead, 29 badly wounded. And that was an anti-Semitic attack, obviously. And I just want to pay my respects to everybody.
And so, what led up to this? Right? Because when there is a mass shooting, we have to ask what could have prevented that mass shooting. Now, the easy answer that people always give is gun confiscation, mass gun confiscation. Well, clearly in this case, the shooters had the guns legally. In the United States, as we'll discuss when we come to a shooting that happened at Brown University, another attempted mass shooting at Brown University, we'll get to talk about gun control, which springs up in the aftermath of every mass shooting in the United States and elsewhere. But we would be remiss, again, if we did not point out that to pretend that this was unexpected in Australia would be ridiculous. It would be ridiculous. There have been warnings going out from the Australian Jewish community for 2 years about the radical increase in anti-Semitic attacks, including firebombing of a synagogue. Questions about the policies that have been promoted by the Australian government to import radical Muslims into the country and to make excuses for their violent actions. Questions asked about why hundreds of thousands of people in places like Australia marched in support of the terrorist group Hamas, or why in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there were rallies at the Sydney Opera House in which people were shouting, "Gas the Jews." Flashback 2023, here's what it looked like when people were literally shouting, "Gas the Jews," outside the Sydney Opera House in the aftermath of October 7th. A country that imports and tolerates this sort of stuff, are we supposed to be shocked when some of these people who are legitimately flying, apparently, ISIS flags, it turns out that they are perfectly happy to commit acts of terrorism? Should we be shocked by that? Australia's Muslim population right now is around 813,000 people, representing about 3.2% of the total Australian population. It has increased 450% from 1991 to 2021. And the Muslim population of Sydney represents 6.3% of the total population, which is pretty significant. Thus, it should be not a particular shock that according to a report published Tuesday by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, the country saw 1,654 incidents during the 12-month period from October 1st, 2024 to September 30th, 2025. That is about 5 times the annual average recorded in the decade prior to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack. And that was actually down from the prior year, which saw over 2,000 incidents. It is not a shock that this sort of stuff has been happening with increasing frequency, especially given the fact that the government of Australia, a very left-wing Labour government, has decided to normalize and mainstream this sort of stuff. I have friends in Australia, some of whom are Jewish, and the amount of security required in Australia for the Jewish community is pretty astonishing. Of course, that now happens to be true, unfortunately, in a lot of places, including pretty much every major Jewish school in the United States. According to the Times of Israel, Linda Bennett-Menashe, the president of the National Council of Jewish Women in Australia, told the Times of Israel, "I'm horrified and devastated that this happened, but not shocked. Over the past 2 years, anti-Semitism has been rising by the month, and the government has not listened to our pleas. When there's no visible consequence to incitement, violence always ensues." Over the past year, Jews in Australia have seen synagogues, schools, and homes firebombed, 2 nurses threatening to kill Jewish patients in their hospitals, and the discovery of a trailer filled with explosives said to have been intended to cause a mass casualty event at a Sydney synagogue. And not again, a gigantic shock. And pretending otherwise would be ridiculous. There have been escalating anti-Semitic incidents in Australia for years. Miranda Devine writes over at the New York Post, "Unchecked anti-Semitism, cowardly appeasement, lax policing, and foolish immigration decisions, half a century in gestation, have coalesced in multicultural southwestern Sydney, an hour's drive from Bondi. In the 2 years since the Hamas attack on Israel, synagogues in Sydney have been firebombed, kosher restaurants vandalized, cars outside Jewish homes torched, and rancid anti-Semitic graffiti have become ubiquitous along the Bondi Promenade. Kill Jews is the mantra. Every weekend for at least 2 years, downtown Sydney has been shut down by Palestinian protests. This is what globalize the Intifada looks like. When people talk about globalizing the Intifada, this is what it looks like. Intifada is violent action, violent resistance. And when you globalize it, you mean kill Jews. That's what it means. Australian Immigration Minister Tony Burke, who has been busy organizing visas for Gazans, was just busted for having a secret meeting with officials to repatriate ISIS brides from Syria. Women who went to Syria to marry members of ISIS were repatriated to Australia. Last year, during a diplomatic trip, Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong visited Gaza, but refused to visit any of the sites of the October 7th massacres. Again, anybody pretending this is a shock is simply pretending. That's all. It is just pretend. It is just pretend. This is a point being made by Ayaan Hirsi Ali over at the Free Press today. She says, this attack was not random. It was not an eruption of private madness. It was deliberate. Jews were targeted on a Jewish holiday in broad daylight in a public place. This matters. When we blur that fact, we betray the dead. But it is worth noting that Anthony Albanese, the prime minister, his original statement completely blurred that fact. Here is his original statement. Quote, "The scenes in Bondi are shocking and distressing. Police and emergency responders are on the ground working to save lives. My thoughts are with every person affected. I've just spoken to the AFP commissioner and with the NSW premier. We are working with the NSW police and will provide further updates as more information is confirmed. I urge people in the vicinity to follow information from the NSW police." You notice what that doesn't say. Anything about the identity of the assailants and anything about the identity of the people who were being shot. When people get shot at a Hanukkah by the Sea event, it's pretty clear why they are being shot. It took Anthony Albanese hours to actually call the attack what it was, which was an attack on Jews.
What we saw yesterday was an act of pure evil, an act of anti-Semitism, an act of terrorism on our shores in an iconic Australian location, Bondi Beach, that is associated with joy, associated with families gathering, associated with celebrations. And it is forever tarnished by what has occurred last evening. This was an attack deliberately targeted at the Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah, which of course should be a joyous celebration, and the Jewish community are hurting today. Today, all Australians wrap our arms around them and say, we stand with you. We will do whatever is necessary to stamp out anti-Semitism. It is a scourge.
Nobody
and we will
believes
eradicate
that.
it
No one.
together.
No one believes that from Anthony Albanese. No one believes that. No one has made more room for anti-Semitism in Australia than Anthony Albanese and his terrible government. More news coming up in a moment. First, common sense. What's the common sense approach to keeping your home and your family safe? Is it taking action after somebody is already inside your house? Well, that doesn't seem very smart to me, but that's what most security companies offer. Our sponsor, SimpliSafe, does the opposite. They stop criminals before they enter your home. Now, that sounds like common sense to me. Before, not after. And they do it with a double layer of defense. First, they've got AI cameras that detect threats early. And here's the key thing. They alert live agents, real people, who actually speak directly to intruders. Hello, what are you doing? You're being watched. I would leave. And you know what? They do leave. Because if they don't, the police are going to get dispatched. Now, that's common sense. That's real security. There are no long-term contracts, no hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. Now, I love SimpliSafe because it means that when we leave in the evening, we know that all our stuff is here in the morning. Everybody is safe around here because of SimpliSafe. SimpliSafe has been named Best Home Security Systems by U.S. News & World Report for 5 years running. They back it up with a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it and see the difference for yourself. This month only, take 50% off any new system. This is one of the best prices you will ever see for SimpliSafe. Don't miss it. Hit simplysafe.com/Shapiro. Again, that's simplysafe.com/Shapiro and lock in your discount. There is no safe like SimpliSafe. Also, it's the holidays. That means you need the best food, right? It's that time of year. This is the time of year where you're going to eat the best stuff. And that also means it's time for comfort, joy, and really good food from Cook Unity. Impress your relatives with those gourmet holiday meals from Cook Unity. Let their chefs handle healthy meal prep with festive, nutritious dishes like maple whipped sweet potatoes and candied yam cake, available for a limited time in select markets. Let's be honest, cooking quality meals, it takes time. It doesn't have to be your time. With Cook Unity, you get chef-crafted dishes delivered fully cooked and ready to heat up in as little as 5 minutes. There's no cooking, shopping, or cleanup to worry about. Cook Unity gives more time back to you. And spending it with the people you care about without the worry of a meal well made is a good thing to do. You can enjoy culinary masterpieces like apple pie bread pudding or rack of lamb with red wine sauce for way less than restaurants or takeout, with commitment-free subscriptions starting as low as $11 per meal. Producer Justin, huge fan. He loves the fresh ingredients and the variety. Again, holiday time for the best food of the year. Cook Unity's chef lineup has Food Network favorites, James Beard Award winners, restaurateurs whose names you'd recognize from the best dining scenes around the country, complete with hand-picked, fresh, seasonal flavors. Taste, comfort, and craftsmanship in every single bite from the award-winning chefs behind Cook Unity. Go to cookunity.com/Ben or enter code Ben before checkout and get 50% off your very first order. That's 50% off your very first order by using code Ben or heading over to cookunity.com/Ben. Ayaan Hirsi Ali writes, one truth must be spoken without hesitation. Islamist extremism isn't merely another grievance-driven movement. It's an existential threat to Western society and to the values that sustain it. It rejects pluralism, despises freedom of conscience, and targets Jews and Christians precisely because those traditions stand for limits on power and the dignity of the individual. History shows this pattern clearly. Where such extremism is tolerated, minorities suffer first, and wider society follows. And that, of course, is totally correct. And pretending that you are hiding behind the guise of anti-Zionism in order to attack Jews as a conspiratorial force in the West, manipulating the systems in order to commit genocide and promoting every lie issued by Hamas, of course, that is going to lead to violence. Of course it is. Pretending otherwise, again, is blind or stupid or evil or all three. It was just back on August 17th, 2025, that Netanyahu wrote a letter to Albanese warning him about the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. Writing, throughout the past year, anti-Semitism has scarred Australian cities. Since your public statements signaling recognition of a Palestinian state, it has intensified. And that, of course, is not a surprise, because if people believe that violence is going to achieve its intended effect, they continue to do the violence. Following Hamas's savage attack on the people of Israel on October 7th, pro-Hamas extremists and left-wing radicals began a campaign of intimidation, vandalism, and violence against Jews across the free world. In Australia, wrote Netanyahu to Albanese, again, this is like a couple of months ago, that campaign has intensified under your watch. These are not isolated incidents. This is an epidemic. Your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on this anti-Semitic fire. It is not diplomacy. It is appeasement. It rewards Hamas terror, hardens Hamas's refusal to free the hostages, emboldens those who menace Australian Jews, and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. And by the way, it is worth noting that when it comes to media coverage of both the question of Jew hatred by radical Muslims in the West and also those links to lies told in Gaza, the former director of the BBC's bureau in the Gaza Strip said that the Islamic terror attack in Sydney was an Israeli false flag operation. That person was overseeing the BBC's bureau in Gaza, so I'm sure the reporting there was absolutely outstanding. That is the thing that matters most. And meanwhile, another terrible mass shooting over the weekend. It happened at Brown University. According to the Wall Street Journal, On Saturday afternoon, a gunman opened fire in a busy academic building, killing 2 and injuring 9. Police releasing a video of a suspect dressed in black and walking on a sidewalk near the scene of the shooting. Authorities detained a person of interest. They then released the person of interest. Brown University student Ella Cook was one of the people killed, according to her hometown church in Birmingham, Alabama. First-year student Kendall Turner of North Carolina was among those injured. The school said she's in critical but stable condition. Apparently, this was an economics study group. The professor was apparently an associate professor also of Jewish studies. And so we still are waiting on motive. We don't know what the motive is yet. We're going to find out, I would assume, sometime today. The shooter is still at large, so we'll find out as soon as we have that information. We'll bring it to you. Meanwhile, a teaching assistant in the classroom described what happened.
Yeah, we just finished up our last review session of the year. And then we ended a little bit late. It ended around like 4:03. And I was giving my closing remarks. And then as soon as everybody stood up and started exiting the room, we heard what sounded like gunshots outside the door. And we heard screaming from various students. And then about 5 seconds later, we see a gunman enter the room. And then he just screamed something and just started shooting.
So you saw the gunman enter the room where you were?
Yeah, I was standing in the front of the auditorium and he came through the back. So we pretty much directly made eye contact. And then as soon as that happened, I looked at my students and signaled them to come to the front, and then I just ducked.
And was the gunman shooting when he entered the room?
No, he came in, pointed the gun, and then he screamed something. I don't know what he said, and none of the other students know what he said, but yeah, then he just started shooting right after that. So from that moment to the first gunshot, it was probably around 5 to 7 seconds.
Now, again, we don't know what the shooter was shouting at this point. There's a lot of speculation, but speculation is not, in fact, evidence or fact. And so we're going to refrain from speculation until we know the identity of the alleged shooter or what actually happened. You know, President Trump put out a statement in the middle of all of this saying that all that could basically be done at that point is prayer.
I've been fully briefed on the Brown University situation, what a terrible thing it is. And all we can do right now is pray for the victims and for those that were very badly hurt, it looks like. And we'll inform you later as to what's happening, but it's a shame. It's a shame. Just pray. Thank you very much.
Now, obviously, Democrats have been calling for more gun control because in the aftermath of every mass shooting, there's a call for gun control. It's always interesting when there's a call for gun control and when there is not. When several dozen people get shot every weekend in Chicago, no calls for gun control. When there is a high-profile mass shooting, a call for gun control. Almost always, the prescribed method of gun control would have done nothing to stop the mass shooting. So, citing a sort of outlier circumstance in order to justify a blanket gun policy is always a strange bit of political legerdemain. Here is Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, who for some reason wants to run for president. I'm not sure exactly why, saying that this is all about the White House not taking on the gun industry. Again, this bizarre idea that the White House won't take on an industry that represents a very kind of rounding error part of America's industrial base is pretty wild. Could it just be that they disagree on the Second Amendment?
Do you think that there is any appetite for any discussion right now?
I mean, of course I will try. And, a month or two before we passed that bill in 2022, people would have said, no way. There's no way Democrats and Republicans can come together. But after Uvalde, things changed. And we were able to get a narrow but important agreement. So I will never stop trying to get bipartisan support. But I think it is pretty clear that President Trump and this White House are in the pocket of the gun lobby. I just don't foresee that this White House is going to support anything that would cross the gun industry. And as we know right now, unfortunately, the Republicans in Congress don't ever meaningfully break from this president. So until they get the okay from President Trump to break with the gun lobby, I think the chances of us getting something done are slim. That doesn't mean I won't try.
Meanwhile, Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, he's out there also claiming that it's just because America tolerates gun violence. It's not about tolerating gun violence. No one is in favor of violence using a gun or using a knife or otherwise. At least no major politician that I've ever heard of. The question is, how do you formulate the public policy that is most likely to be effective without invading the rights of Americans, right? That, of course, is always the question. But this kind of emotivism in which you claim that your opponents just don't care about people who are killed in violence with a gun is silly.
It is a somber morning indeed, and as I make my way to my own pulpit this morning, I'm going to say a special prayer for Brown University and for our nation. And I can tell you that as a pastor who has presided over many funerals, I don't think that there's any pain deeper than when nature is violently reversed, and rather than children burying their parents, the parent has to bear the child. And so we pray prayers for these families, but we have to pray not only with our lips but with our action. Any nation that tolerates this kind of violence year after year, decade after decade, in random places on our college and school campuses without doing all that we can to stop it is broken and in need of moral repair.
Now, again, the idea that gun laws are going to fix this, I have some very, very serious doubts, and Democrats they seem unable to actually suggest specific gun laws that would prevent any of the types of gun crimes that are occurring, other than mass gun confiscation, which they won't actually articulate out loud because they understand that it's politically unpopular. Nonetheless, these sorts of situations seem to be for Democrats an opportunity to mouth platitudes about how the other side doesn't care about people who are dying, which of course is not true. Coming up, ISIS shooters in the Syrian military, 3 Americans dead. We'll get to it in a moment. First, Grand Canyon University, our sponsor. It's an affordable private Christian university based in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. It's one of the largest universities in the country. Praised for its culture of community and impact, GCU integrates the free market system, a welcoming Christian worldview, and free and open discourse into 369 academic programs with over 300 online. Join a nationwide community of learners, redefining what online education looks like through academically rigorous, industry-driven programs that can spark bold ideas and prepare you for a future that matters. In addition to federal grants and aid, GCU's online students received nearly $161 million in institutional scholarships in 2024 alone. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/myoffer to see the scholarships you might qualify for. Go check them out right now. Grand Canyon University. It's fabulous. I've been there. I visited the campus. Great people, amazing campus. Go check them out and get a degree worth having at GCU. Check them out at gcu.edu/myoffer and see the scholarships you might qualify for. Also, when we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had to figure everything out with minimal help. Editorial guidelines, studio setup, production schedule, branding. It was overwhelming. New decisions were necessary every day. Finding that one tool that simplifies everything when you start a business becomes a game changer and a lifesaver. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own Daily Wire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get all the goods. Now, you might be asking, what if I can't design a website? Or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand. Not a problem. Shopify's got you covered from the start with beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand's style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. And meanwhile, on the foreign front, another terrible shooting. According to the Wall Street Journal, the attacker who killed 3 Americans in an ambush on U.S. forces in Syria on Saturday was a member of the Syrian security forces who is set to be fired for holding extremist views, according to Syrian and U.S. officials. So, apparently there was an attack on Saturday at the entrance of a fortified facility of the Internal Security Command, that's Syria's main domestic security force, Palmyra, according to the Interior Ministry spokesman. The meeting was described by U.S. officials as an effort to broaden cooperation between the U.S. military and Syria's interior ministry and extend it to central Syria. The assailant was armed with a machine gun and fired on both U.S. and Syrian troops from a nearby building. 2 soldiers from the Iowa National Guard were killed. 3 others were wounded. A U.S. civilian working as an interpreter was also killed, and a Syrian officer was killed and 2 others injured, according to the Interior Ministry. Iowa Guard soldiers had been deployed to the Middle East earlier this year, including in Syria. Again, apparently the attacker appeared to be a former ISIS insurgent who had joined Syria's security forces after the fall of Assad as part of a quote-unquote infiltration operation. This is going to be very difficult because the reality is that the current head of Syria is a former ISIS member. And that government is working closely with Turkey. And so to pretend that the new security forces kind of turned over whatever flag was on their uniform and suddenly there's no threat of terrorism against Americans or allies is really, really silly. All of this is going to have to be done with tremendous caution. Because, again, to pretend that the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara'a, is suddenly a Muslim moderate, I'm waiting to see the evidence on that one, truly. It seems more like he is mouthing moderation to the West while simultaneously making common cause with Tayyip Recep Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey, and also continuing to hug close many of his former ISIS colleagues who have now joined him inside the Syrian government. So listen, hope for the best in Syria, but remain skeptical. Seems to be the best idea. Navy Admiral Brad Cooper, the top U.S. commander in the region, visited Damascus in September with Tom Barrack, the U.S. ambassador in Turkey and special envoy to Syria, to thank Shara'a for his support in fighting militants. Shara'a had officially joined the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS during his White House meeting with Trump. That, of course, is after he sort of broke with ISIS. It is worth noting here that Tom Barrack, the ambassador in Turkey, is extraordinarily pro-Turkey. He is also extraordinarily pro-Shara'a. And so, in the words that come out of Tom Barrack, I think we can take with a grain of salt. President Trump lashed out at ISIS for the killing of the Americans and promised retaliation. Here's the president's response.
So we mourn the loss of 3 great patriots in Syria. You know how it happened. There was an ambush, terrible. We also have 3 wounded. They seem to be doing pretty well. But we mourn the loss. These are 3 great people. And just a terrible thing. Syria, by the way, was fighting along with us. The new president of Syria is, as they told me, and I'm not surprised, he's devastated by what happened. This was an ISIS attack on us and Syria. And again, we mourn the loss and we pray for them and their parents and their loved ones. Very, very sad.
Mr. President, will the U.S. retaliate against ISIS?
Yeah, we will.
And should U.S. forces attack again?
You're going to be seeing.
And should the U.S. still be
We will retaliate. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to see what happens from here. Alrighty, meanwhile, horrible story out of Los Angeles. Director Rob Reiner, who of course is incredibly famous for a wide variety of terrific movies, ranging from The Princess Bride to When Harry Met Sally to This Is Spinal Tap, Misery, A Few Good Men. He had kind of a historic run in the late 80s, early 90s. He's also the son of Carl Reiner, one of the great Hollywood comedians. He was found dead in his home with his wife, Michelle Singer, of what police are calling a homicide, a truly horrifying story. Truly, truly terrible. He was 78, she was 68. According to the family spokesperson, it is with profound sorrow we announce the tragic passing of Michelle and Rob Reiner. We're heartbroken by the sudden loss. We ask for privacy during this unbelievably difficult time. Apparently, the police are conducting a death investigation. There is suspicion that a family member is involved. Obviously, when you're talking about the death of anyone, the murder of anyone who is a fellow American, politics go by the wayside, and they always should. They really, really should. Rob Reiner may have disagreed with conservatives on politics, but who cares? What difference does that make? It's a horrifying tragedy. It's truly terrible. A family member is being held for questioning. Again, they were apparently murdered. According to TMZ, they were found dead from knife wounds. Detectives are treating the incident as a double homicide. Investigators are, in fact, quizzing an unnamed family member. The couple's daughter lives across the street and made the discovery, which is just awful. The Reiners had a son, Nick, 32, a screenwriter who has apparently struggled with drug addiction and bouts of homelessness as well. Truly awful stuff. And our prayers go out to the Reiner family. Just what a horrifying end to a truly great artist. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, the best deals of the year are still live right now at Jeremy's Razors, but today is your last day to order for Christmas delivery, like today. Now is the time to get your final gifts and stock up for yourself. You want a full year of shaving? $49.99. That's it. No games, no virtue signals, just a damn good razor that works. Behold, the Precision 5 here from Jeremy's Razors. This is the shaving equipment you use if you're a real man. If not, I don't know what to tell you. If you're ordering over $100, free shipping. These are razors built for dudes who don't back down, guys who show up, work hard, and refuse to cave to the nonsense. Head on over to jeremy'srazors.com right now. This right here, your last chance. Order today at jeremy'srazors.com. And meanwhile, in domestic political news, the debate goes on with regard to Obamacare and extensions of Democratic subsidies. On Friday, House Republicans unveiled a health care bill that they will bring to a vote next week, including items that are broadly popular in the party, like cost-sharing reductions and reforms to the pharmacy benefit manager industry. It does not include extension of those Obamacare subsidies that Joe Biden put into place. He put these gigantic extensions of Obamacare subsidies into place during the late stages of the pandemic, and then he left them in place, and now they're set to expire, and then Democrats are blaming Republicans for the fact that Joe Biden decided to create this massive new subsidy scheme that sunsets. House GOP leaders will allow an amendment vote on extending those Obama subsidies, according to a GOP leadership aide. That is a concession to moderates who've been calling to go on the record on the matter. Unclear what that amendment is going to look like. A House Republican leadership aide said, "We expect there will be an amendment that is being worked on, so the process will allow for that amendment." So this could be the House allowing for the possibility of an expanded Obamacare subsidy at the same time as there are changes to things like cost-sharing reductions and reforms to that pharmacy benefit manager industry, which adds some cost between the middlemen. Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana, on Sunday expressed some cautious optimism that there would be a compromise to extend those Obamacare subsidies for a select group of Americans before the subsidies expire at the end of the year. Senator Cassidy appeared on CBS News' Face the Nation to discuss the possibility of a deal.
We've got to do something for affordability for the people in the exchanges. And I would say that the only thing that Democrats would accept was something that would decrease the premiums. But if a family has a $6,000 out of pocket before they get into the strength of the insurance plan, then frankly, the policy is catastrophic. It brings profit to the insurance company, but not benefit to the patient. So I would argue that it actually is, there has to be a meeting of the minds between Democrats and Republicans. Let's acknowledge you've got to put cash in the patient's pocket to pay the out-of-pocket. I would be willing to do a short-term extension of the premium tax credits for those people with higher premiums if they will concede that we've got to do something for the $6,000 out-of-pocket. I think there's a deal to be had here. We need to push for that deal.
So why exactly is that deal not happening? If Republicans are willing to make a compromise on the Obamacare subsidies, at least temporarily, in exchange for example, some health savings account to be set up that will eventually, we would hope, replace those Obamacare subsidies. Why isn't a deal happening? Cassidy said the Democrats are holding it up.
Do you need more White House help on this? And sir, you're running out of time here. Do you really think you can get this done before January 1st?
Our problem is not with Republicans. Our problem has been with Democrats. But of course, they may say that about us. So what I am kind of searching for is a deal in which both have their concerns addressed. If you do that and you put this in place, you really have until the end of like March to get it done. Because with these kind of accounts that people have money in, they just save the receipts, they submit them, and they get reimbursed. It happens, this is what we do in my family. We have a flexible spending account.
Yeah.
And so we can get this done, and I think we can meet the concerns both about the out-of-pocket, but also about the premium.
So what precisely will Republicans get in this deal? Presumably, Cassidy said, there have to be some terms that cut out the amount of Obamacare fraud, which is pretty significant.
Do you think that the Republicans, the ones that you talk to, would go for anything that does extend the premium help?
It has to have reforms to cut out the fraud. There's an estimated billions of dollars in fraud the way the current system is currently constructed. But if you address the fraud, and particularly you address the fact that the premiums being pushed, the policies being pushed have $6,000 deductibles, again, it's more about profit for the insurance company than protection for the patient. If we do that, I think there could be interest in a short-term extension. I think that could be the deal.
And so it'll be interesting to see whether that indeed happens. What Cassidy is suggesting is probably the most politically palatable thing for Republicans if they don't wish to lose a bunch of purple swing state seats in the midterm elections if the Obamacare subsidies were to expire and those prices were to rise, and Democrats threw that at Republicans. It'd be very difficult for Republicans in purple states to be able to defend themselves. And so, of course, political considerations have come to sort of center stage in all of this. Meanwhile, a lot of controversy remains over the Trump tariffs. The Trump administration is interested in finalizing tariff payments. According to Politico, the Trump administration is racing to deposit the money it has raised from tariffs into the U.S. Treasury, a tactic that could make it harder for companies to get refunds for duties the Supreme Court may strike down in the coming months. So what they're trying to do is prevent, if the Supreme Court were to strike down these tariffs retroactively, they're trying to prevent companies from clawing back the amount that they paid to the federal government in tariffs. That has triggered a flurry of lawsuits in recent weeks, with companies ranging from Costco to the canned tuna seller Bumblebee looking to preserve access to potential refunds for tens of billions of dollars worth of tariff fees, and it foreshadows the messy legal battles likely to play out if the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs. Apparently, Trump's Customs and Border Protection Agency is denying requests to delay finalizing tariff payments and transferring the funds to Treasury. In fact, they are even fast-tracking the process. So they suspect the Supreme Court might strike it down, and they are trying to grab as much tariff revenue as humanly possible. Typically, Customs and Border Protection grants a 314-day window after goods enter the U.S. to liquidate the tariffs and send money to the Treasury Department. Once that happens, importers can't challenge the tariff payment through routine customs correction. Instead, they have to go through a complex formal protest process and litigation. And apparently, the Trump administration is now trying to speed that up. So, the Trump administration is very concerned the Supreme Court is going to strike down those tariffs. Kevin Hassett, chair of the National Council of Economic Advisors, he who is now being considered for the chair of the Federal Reserve, he says that throwing out the tariffs would create a serious economic problem.
The future of these tariffs, though, does hang in the balance right now, and the Supreme Court ultimately has to make the decision on this. If you had the opportunity to have the justices consider a version of this from your perspective, what is it that you would say to them, and how important is it that we keep these tariffs?
The tariffs have been working, and they've been really good for the American people. We've got about 4% growth right now. We've got inflation going down, and we've got the biggest reduction in a year-over-year deficit that you've ever seen. And if they were to throw the tariffs out, then they could create a really serious economic problem. Now, I want you to know that we study all eventualities at this White House. As people shouldn't panic if they throw these things out, but they create a real problem because a lot of the tariff revenue has to be refunded to people potentially, and that's very disruptive. And the law says that we're allowed to regulate trade, but it doesn't use the word tariff, and that's what the left is. They're hanging everything on that one thing.
Well, it's not the left. I mean, let's be fair about this. The law does not say that the executive branch of the government is allowed to, quote unquote, regulate trade. Just as a general rule, that power belongs to Congress. It's in the legislative power. And when it comes to national emergencies, then there's the possibility of doing something on an emergency basis. But again, the authority being used to do these widespread tariffs on everything up to and including penguins in the Solomon Islands, that, of course, is a very shoddy legal case. I've been pointing that out since literally day one. Now, what will be the knock-on effects? Well, yeah, I mean, there will be some real problems as far as people trying to claw back the money that they paid to the federal government, especially because people already bought the products. So presumably the company then gets the payment for the product, and then they claw back the tax that they paid to the U.S. government. There's also the problem of what happens going forward to these tariff rates. Does the Trump administration go through another round of chaotic ministrations in an attempt to revive those tariffs through some sort of other executive authority, and then you get another set of lawsuits? As far as the sort of rosy view of tariffs, neither the rosy view nor the catastrophic view of tariffs has actually come to pass. Some of that is because of uncertainty about the implementation of tariffs in the first place. According to the Wall Street Journal, analyzing various factors as to what would happen in the aftermath of the tariffs. When it comes to employment, employment is the highest in 4 years. Some of that is probably due to the tariffs. Manufacturers have not been gaining jobs. However, the tariffs have not skyrocketed inflation. According to the Wall Street Journal, both Trump and economists largely missed the mark on inflation. Tariffs swiftly hit Americans' wallets as major retailers from Macy's to Best Buy raised prices in response to the duties. But the worst inflation fears have not yet come to pass because tariffs touch a narrow band of consumer prices. Housing and gasoline have helped keep overall inflation in check. Believe it or not, housing has actually been declining in pricing over the course of the last year. So has gasoline. Also, a lot of people have not actually lowered their prices in expectation that President Trump's going to shift his tariff policy because it's been up and down and all around. As far as tariff revenue, yes, the federal government has raised extraordinary tariff revenue, almost $200 billion in net customs duties collected on U.S. imports. Is that going to replace the income tax? Not even remotely close, however. As far as economic growth, in spite of the tariffs, economic growth has been really, really high. The third quarter GDP estimate is almost 4%, which is really, really high. And again, a huge amount of that is because so much of our investment is going into tech industries that really are not being affected by the tariffs in the same way. All the investment is going into AI, for example, AI development. Well, that's not affected by tariffs in remotely the same way. U.S. manufacturing activity has actually continued to contract. So, contra the White House, tariffs have not revived American manufacturing. Instead, U.S. factory activity has contracted for 9 straight months. And as far as the trade balance basically looks kind of the same as it did before the tariffs. There was an immediate skyrocket, actually, of imports as people tried to beat the tariffs. And then what we've seen is that exports and imports have kind of remained similar to where they were before. So either the tariffs aren't big enough, or they haven't been promoted heavily enough, or they haven't been implemented strictly enough. And so you're kind of getting a mixed bag with regard to tariffs. But will there be some chaos in the economy if the tariffs are struck down by the Supreme Court, which, by the way, I think will happen? I mean, sure, there will be some chaos. Will it be solved? Yes, it will be. And again, I think there's a case to be made that if the tariffs go away, you're going to get a boom economy. You already have an economy that is basically on the verge of booming if people had any level of predictability as to what happens next. Kevin Hassett says we're on the verge of perhaps the greatest economy in American history.
If you had a crystal ball and you looked to the very end of President Trump's second term in office, where would you expect to see this economy?
I think that we're already right on the cusp of having the greatest economy that the U.S. has ever seen. I think that Trump policies are about as good as it gets. I think that there's never been a time in American history where policy was more perched to make growth really, really high. And the fact that that's happening precisely when we're getting this big positive supply shock from artificial intelligence means that you could easily have 4 or 5% growth for the entire Trump term, which would be obviously the best 4 years in history, really. And so I think that that's my core expectation. And I think that this will go down in history as a golden age.
Now, his mouth to God's ears. Obviously, a booming economy would be fantastic for the country and also fantastic for the Republican Party. Okay, meanwhile, on Ukraine, the pressure has been almost universally on Ukraine from the United States to end the war, despite the fact that, again, it's really about the security guarantees that the West hands to Ukraine as to whether Ukraine even has the capacity to make a move like that. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump's top envoys held 5 hours of talk with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Berlin on Sunday. Washington hailed progress as the administration steps up more pressure on Ukraine to seal a peace deal with Russia by year end. Now, again, what is Russia willing to give up? I'm just going to keep asking that question until we get any sort of answer at all. Is there an answer? What is the sacrifice Russia is making? Anyone? Bueller? Ukraine is balking at Washington's call to withdraw its forces from areas that Kyiv's forces still hold. So the call is for Ukraine to surrender territory that Russia hasn't even won. European and Ukrainian officials are pushing for some clarity on what the U.S. would do if Russia were to break a peace deal and attack Ukraine. Well, yeah, that would be the biggest question, considering that we did this routine in 2014 under Barack Obama. And then Russia walked right back in 2022 under Joe Biden. After Sunday's talks ended in the late evening, the Trump administration's Russia envoy Steve Witkoff said on X that the two sides held in-depth discussions on the peace plan. He said a lot of progress was made. They will meet again tomorrow morning. One person briefed on Sunday's talks described them as difficult, saying the U.S. side appeared unwilling to compromise on its peace proposal draft. I think what's going to end up happening here is the Europeans are simply going to have to radically accelerate their support for Ukraine because the Trump administration looks ready to walk away. I think that's a terrible move. I think that incentivizing the Russians to be more aggressive, not only in the region, but globally, is a huge mistake. All this nonsense about Russia being a potential ally to the United States is just that. It is nonsense. If you read the speeches that Vladimir Putin has made in Russian to his own people, if you read the writings of Alexander Dugin, called Putin's brain by many, it is very clear that his vision for the future of Eastern Europe and for conflict with the United States is a dark vision. And pretending that appeasing Vladimir Putin is somehow going to amount to some sort of lasting peace with Vladimir Putin, that's a fool's errand. It really is. It was a fool's errand when Obama was trying it. It was a fool's errand when Joe Biden was trying it. And it's a fool's errand no matter who tries it, because Vladimir Putin has not changed, not one iota. His goals are exactly the same as they were when he took power. According to Axios, the proposal that is currently being made is a demilitarized zone with national security advisors of Ukraine, Germany, France, and the UK. Unclear exactly what that would trigger if Russia walked over that border. Typically, international security forces have totally failed. As soon as there's a major threat, countries simply withdraw their forces, and then the threatening force walks through. A U.S. official says there might be 3 separate agreements on peace, security guarantees, and reconstruction. Apparently, the negotiations over economic and reconstruction are going well. Well, of course, because that's just a question of money. Several European leaders have been counseling Zelensky he doesn't need to rush into a deal, especially one that forces him to cede territory Ukraine hasn't actually lost. And by the way, they're negotiating against themselves. Russia has not signaled that it accepts the deal. Turns out that negotiating against yourself is a pretty bad way to negotiate as a general rule. Alrighty, coming up, we'll jump into the mailbag as the show continues. Remember, in order to watch, you do have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. President Trump totally upends geopolitics with the arrest and extradition of Nicolas Maduro. We examine what that means. Is the Iraq syndrome finally dead? Plus, Tim Walz is out as the third term possibility for governor in Minnesota. Plus, a trans-identifying person possibly breaks into J.D. Vance's house in Cincinnati. First, everything the Daily Wire has to offer is now available in one app. Download the new Daily Wire Plus app. Take the entire show with you wherever you are. Inside the app, tap follow under my picture. You'll get notified the moment I go live or a new episode drops. Step away at any point. Come back exactly where you left off. You can watch the clips everyone is arguing about online without subjecting yourself to social media. The Daily Wire Plus app is where the community lives, chatting live during shows, sharing ideas, debating the big questions, and because it's ours, it can't be canceled, censored, or shut down. Download the new Daily Wire Plus app right now on iOS, Android, Roku, Samsung, and more. Well, yesterday, Nicolas Maduro, the erstwhile dictator of Venezuela, who, of course, was extradited by the United States in a snatch-and-grab operation, shocking in its magnitude and competence, appeared in U.S. court for the very first time. Again, unthinkable 1 week ago, and yet here we now are. According to the Wall Street Journal, he pled guilty to narco-trafficking charges during his arraignment in federal court. He said, "I am innocent. I'm not guilty. I'm a decent man. I'm still the president of my country." Well, all of those things are not true. He is, in fact, guilty. He is, in fact, not a decent man. He's responsible for the deaths of probably hundreds of thousands of his own compatriots, the exile of millions. "I'm still the president of my country." He really is not. He adds that he was a prisoner of war and had been kidnapped from his home in Caracas. According to the Wall Street Journal, Monday's hearing kicked off a legal battle with little precedent over a foreign leader in U.S. court. The arrest of a head of state presents challenges for both the prosecutors and the defense, and it could be years before this thing goes to trial. The judge interjected and told him that there would be a time and place to make the argument that he was wrongfully apprehended. His wife sat at the same defense table. Apparently, there were some signs of injury sustained during her capture. And again, the charges include cocaine importation conspiracy and possession of machine guns. They're being detained at a Brooklyn federal jail, apparently to the great consternation of New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who really should be happier about all of this. After all, we just provided an illegal immigrant, Venezuelan drug dealer, with free housing in New York. So he really should be quite happy about all of this. The next hearing is set for March 17th. Meanwhile, what is going on over in Venezuela? Well, you have the vice president of Venezuela, a woman named Delcy Rodriguez, who is by all accounts just as vicious, brutal, and Machiavellian as Nicolas Maduro. She has been left in charge. Her brother is the head of the Venezuelan Assembly, which, of course, is a puppet group, a puppet legislature The question is whether the United States will be able to exert enough pressure on Delcy Rodriguez to get what we want, namely a reopening of the oil industry in Venezuela, a transition, you would hope, to some sort of actual democratic order that ends the socialist tyranny that has dominated Venezuela. You would assume that the reason the United States did not just topple the regime outright is because we do not want tons of boots on the ground in Venezuela, and that external pressure will force Delcy Rodriguez to essentially give up the ghost at an unspecified time in the future. It'll have to be fairly short order, obviously, because President Trump only has 3 years left in office, and I do not trust a Democratic successor or possibly a Republican successor to do the right thing here. According to the Wall Street Journal, Maduro's top lieutenant, Delcy Rodriguez, was sworn in as the country's acting president on Monday. Small groups of armed civilians known as colectivos, paramilitary units in support of the ousted president, sped around Caracas on motorbikes. His loyalists are still very much in power. Rodriguez immediately declared a state of external commotion, authorizing police to search for and arrest anyone who supported the raid by U.S. commandos who snatched Maduro and his wife. Now, the question is whether some of this is for show, whether she's attempting to demonstrate that she really is a continuation of Maduro's regime while really sort of doing the bidding of the Americans, saying outrageous things, doing outrageous things simply to keep her loyalists in line while actually doing the work of the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, Maduro hardliners in the legislature, including his own son, whose name is Nicolásito, took part in a ceremony on Monday to swear in the National Assembly for a term that is supposed to last all the way until 2031. Apparently, armed men were performing spot checks in the Capitol on Monday, stopping drivers to check their vehicles, forcing people to unlock their cell phones for suspect messages. At least 7 journalists were detained. 3 of them were released. 4 of them remain apparently under arrest. Apparently, many residents didn't believe they could go out into the streets. One banking advisor in Caracas said there's no change at all. We're going to remain in the same situation because it's the same people. So the question, of course, is what comes next? Stephen Miller, special advisor to the president of the United States, he says, listen, we are setting the terms and conditions here no matter what the Venezuelan government is currently saying.
We are in charge because we have the United States military stationed outside the country. We set the terms and conditions. We have a complete embargo on all of their oil and their ability to do commerce. So for them to do commerce, they need our permission. For them to be able to run an economy, they need our permission. So the United States is in charge. The United States is running the country during this transition period.
If that's true,
obviously that doesn't mean that President Trump is setting the bus fare schedule inside the country.
Okay, so the question is what that means. How much pressure can we actually exert? How much leverage can we exert on the Venezuelan government to do the things that we want to see done in Venezuela, meaning an actual change of regime? Because let's be clear here, the goal here is not merely to get Delcy Rodriguez to open up the oil industry. No one is going to invest in a country in which the dictator can simply revert back to type the minute that President Trump is out of office. This has been one of the major problems when it comes to investment in Latin and South America by major corporations. If you've got a 10-year runway, for example, to get to the oil that you need, then how are you going to invest 10 years worth knowing that at any moment Delcy Rodriguez could change her mind and simply nationalize the oil industry again when President Trump is out of office? And so there has to be real effectuated change with serious commitment and the ability to carry out what needs to happen. So who are the major players here? Again, according to the Wall Street Journal, Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello and Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino command Venezuela's police and military. Those are the forces that kept Maduro in power for more than a decade, with their deadly crackdowns on dissent, and probably tens of thousands of people were imprisoned or killed by this regime. And so you are talking about the functional military apparatus of Venezuela, which typically a dictator will ensure is loyal to him. Something happened here that made clear that they were no longer loyal to Maduro, and they were hoping that Trump would take his foot off the gas. If Trump keeps his foot on the gas, and I mean that almost literally, if the United States continues to inhibit the flow of oil in and out of Venezuela, to prevent exports, to control the airspace, it's going to make it very difficult for the Venezuelan regime to continue to buck President Trump's demands. Right now, Cabello and Padrino are displaying unity with Rodriguez, but they represent a wild card for President Trump's bet that the remnants of the regime will fall in line to avoid Maduro's fate. For now, Cabello and Padrino appear to be playing ball after that large-scale strike that took out Maduro's personal security apparatus and led to his capture. So if the regime falls, then both of them are in serious trouble. They might find themselves in jail. You could see a world in which they end up having to go into exile. They also may not have a hell of a lot of choice because, again, the United States demonstrated its full-scale dominance militarily over whatever the Venezuelan military thinks it is doing. In a moment, we'll get to President Trump's demands for Venezuela's new government. First, as we move into 2026, many businesses, including Daily Wire, are ramping up hiring efforts to meet ambitious new objectives. But bringing those goals to life requires assembling the right team, and that's easier said than done. Today's hiring landscape presents unique obstacles, from sourcing candidates with niche expertise to sifting through overwhelming numbers of applications to find the truly qualified prospects. For companies facing these hurdles, our sponsor ZipRecruiter offers a solution designed to streamline that entire hiring process. Right now, you can explore what ZipRecruiter has to offer at no cost by visiting ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter's matching technology really cuts through the typical hiring headaches. As soon as you post a role, you can see exactly how many qualified candidates are in your area. No guessing, no waiting around. Their resume database lets you go straight to top candidates and access their contact info immediately, and that saves both time and money. It's no surprise they're the #1 rated hiring site on G2. When you're running a company, you need tools that actually deliver results. That's what ZipRecruiter does. Let ZipRecruiter help you find the best people for all your roles. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter will get a quality candidate within day one. See for yourself. Just go to this exclusive web address right now and try ZipRecruiter for free. ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. So what exactly are the demands? According to Politico, the Trump administration is demanding that Venezuela's interim leader take several pro-U.S. actions her predecessor refused if she wants to avoid also finding herself in court in the United States. Officials have told Delcy Rodriguez they want to see at least 3 moves from her. 1, cracking down on drug flows. 2, kicking out Iranian, Cuban, and other operatives of countries or networks hostile to Washington. And 3, stopping the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries, according to a U.S. official familiar with the situation and a person familiar with the administration's internal discussions. U.S. officials also expect Rodriguez to eventually facilitate free elections and step aside, but the deadlines for those demands are fluid, and U.S. officials stress there are no elections imminent. This, by the way, is not a personal thing. There are a lot of members of the media right now who are trying to suggest that the reason that President Trump is not putting in place the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, Machado, that the reason for that is because he has some sort of personal animus that she won the Nobel Peace Prize. That's really, really silly. That is not what's going on. The actual thing that is happening is that she has no ability to govern because she does not have forces on the ground. Maria Corina Machado. If she were in charge of the military or something, then there would be the ability to put her in place. But if you just say she's in charge now, there's no way to actually effectuate that absent serious boots on the ground. This is why when Representative Maria Salazar says that Machado should leave the country, when there's an election, she should. The problem right now is, how do you make that happen? How do you get from point A to point B? Here was Maria Salazar making the case for Machado.
Marco Rubio said it. It's been 48 hours. Let's give us a few months until we create the stability. And I'm sure that Maria Corina Machado, who is the leader of the opposition, of the Democratic opposition, will go back in, be able to put together the process so you can have free and fair elections with international observers. I'm sure she will be the nominee that Maduro did not allow her to be, the presidential nominee. I'm sure she's going to win.
Now, again, the question of how we get to an election is the big question here. According to the Wall Street Journal, the CIA had concluded that Machado would not have the ability to actually effectuate a shift in power in Venezuela at this time. She doesn't have the support base, not among the people, but with the actual people who have the guns. And it turns out that the people who have the guns typically make the rules. According to an intelligence report cited by the Wall Street Journal, it said that Rodriguez and 2 other top Venezuelan regime figures would be possible interim rulers who could keep order. The 2 hardliners, again, who we've mentioned, that would be Cabello and Padrino, could undo any efforts at a transition. Both face U.S. criminal charges similar to those filed against Maduro. They are seen as unlikely to cooperate with Washington, but they may be a little bit more likely now that, their boss got defenestrated and brought to the United States for trial. According to the Wall Street Journal, last year, the CIA cultivated a source within Maduro's inner circle who provided information on his whereabouts. The spy agency's close tracking of Maduro's location, which leveraged other surveillance elements, including stealth drones, allowed the Army's Delta Force to nab him and his wife during the raid, people familiar with the operation said. So, what exactly is going to happen next? Well, the better course is likely to compel Rodriguez to initiate a transition of power. Presumably, economic discontent, identifying people maybe even lower down on the military infrastructure ladder, who have now been elevated thanks to the moves against Maduro, might be a way to effectuate almost a second coup. But the threat is out there and it exists very clearly. Now, this may not be the end of the story. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, he says that given the fact that Venezuelan oil is propping up the Cuban regime, Cuba may be next.
You just wait for Cuba. Cuba is a communist dictatorship that's killed priests and nuns. They've preyed on their own people. Their days are numbered. We're going to wake up one day, I hope in 26, in our backyard, we're going to have allies in these countries doing business with America, not narco-terrorist dictators killing Americans.
Okay, well, again, he is not wrong about this. Having Venezuela back in Cuba and then Venezuela no longer being able to support Cuba means that Cuba is in danger of falling as well. The other country that has come up a lot is the country of Colombia, where Gustavo Petro, who is a radical far-left socialist, is the leader. Now, he was only inaugurated in 2022, so he's not been in power for all that long. There is a one-term limit for presidents in Colombia, and it turns out that many of the politicians who have actually run Colombia in the past were right-wing or center-right. So Petro is a difference. He doesn't actually require a coup. Now, there is due to be another election this year in Colombia. So he can talk all he wants. As long as there's a legit election, he probably loses in Colombia. He's very unpopular. Here's Petro trying to shout at President Trump. He says, don't threaten me. I'll wait for you here if you want. I do not accept invasions. I do not accept missiles. I do not accept assassinations. I accept intelligence. Come here to speak intelligently, and we receive you. And we talked one-on-one and with real figures, not lies. Stop lying. Okay, first of all, let's be real. If the United States fires a missile, he will be accepting the missile. He doesn't have much of a choice about it, but it's not necessary. Petro is not eligible to run for re-election. Right now, if you look at the polling in Colombia, it's wide open. You have somebody from Petro's group named Ivan Cepeda, who's of the left. You have a candidate of the right, sort of populist figure, sort of Trumpian figure. You have another sort of more classical conservative figure. By August, there will likely be a different regime in place in Colombia. So the idea that we need to effectuate some sort of regime change in Colombia is not even true. And that's just Petro railing against the machine. Meanwhile, again, one of the big purposes here for the United States is to reopen the Venezuelan oil industry in a productive way that is directed toward the West and mostly directed away from Iran and China, cutting out the legs from underneath the oil support base for our geopolitical opponents. Right now, China gets an enormous percentage of its oil from Russia and Iran, but it also gets a not insignificant percentage from Venezuela. And so if China were to be deprived of that, that would do China pretty significant damage. By the way, Chinese weapons were on the ground in Venezuela. They didn't do much of a difference against the United States military. Right now, Chevron is trying to figure out whether or not to invest serious dollars in the Venezuelan oil industry. Energy stocks jumped yesterday on the assumption that the United States would not have taken Maduro if it did not have a plan for a transition to a privatized oil industry in Venezuela. According to the New York Times, President Trump has now allowed Chevron to continue operating in Venezuela. The company is in prime position to benefit after U.S. forces captured Maduro over the weekend. That remarkable turnaround is due in part to a spirited lobbying effort that included several conversations over the past year between President Trump and Mike Wirth, Chevron's mild-mannered chief executive. So Chevron stayed active in the Venezuelan area, and now they look like they are the company most likely to benefit from a reopening of Venezuelan private oil drilling. For Chevron, the rationale for staying in Venezuela was simple, apparently. Under a new contract in 2006, the company received an ownership stake in a key Venezuelan project rather than being paid a fee to produce oil there. Chevron apparently saw that if oil prices rose in the future, then they were taking the upside. So Chevron is still there. Chevron may benefit from all of this. Listen, cheaper energy, a Venezuela that is not directed at support of China or is barred from support of China is a win for the United States. Does that get us everywhere that we'd like to see Venezuela go? No. But there will be, I would assume, a transitional plan here towards something better for Venezuelans, even if it is not in the immediate term. And of course, what President Trump is attempting to do is to effectuate the will of the American people, to serve the interests of the American people without getting involved in a large-scale occupation of Venezuela. Meanwhile, the DHS Assistant Secretary, Tricia McLaughlin, she's saying that Venezuelans who are here on temporary protected status can now go home because Maduro isn't in charge. Well, I mean, we may be a little bit away from that, given the fact that, again, the regime still in power is still Maduro's regime. It's all of his remnants.
I'm not seeing any changes to our posture on this. I think the great news for those who are here from Venezuela on temporary protected status is that they can now go home with hope for their country, a country that they love, that there's going to be peace, prosperity, and stability. Tell me.
You know, we can hope that that's going to emerge very soon. It's not quite there yet. Right? We are in phase A of whatever happens in Venezuela. Now, the left's reaction has been exactly what you would predict. Some of it is just pure anti-Americanism. Internationally, you can see all the enemies of the United States very, very upset. So, for example, the representative of Colombia at the United Nations, Leonor Zalabada Torres, had this to say.
Colombia condemns categorically the events that occurred in the early morning of the 3rd of January in Venezuela, where we saw multiple explosions and air activity over Caracas and other areas of the country as part of a military attack carried out by the United States, which included bombings of civilian and military infrastructure, creating panic amongst the population. All of this represents clear violations of the sovereignty, political independence, and the territorial integrity of Venezuela.
Now, other representatives condemning the United States included the Russian Federation as well as China, of course. Here is the Chinese representative, Su Lei, at the UN, condemning the United States for its actions against Nicolas Maduro.
On January the 3rd, the United States blatantly launched large-scale military strikes against Venezuela, forcibly seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and took them out of the country. It claimed that it will run Venezuela and even didn't rule out launching a second round of military operations on an even larger scale. China is deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S.
Our ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, he, of course, had the proper response, which was, who gives a flying bleep what Russia and China and Colombia think of all of this? These are not exactly human rights-oriented nations.
If the UN and the United Nations in this body confers legitimacy on an illegitimate narco-terrorist and the same treatment in this charter of a democratically elected president or head of state, what kind of organization is this?
And the answer is the United Nations is a garbage organization, and I would hope that on his way out of office in 3 years, President Trump defunds the United Nations entirely, uses eminent domain to take control of the building and builds a Trump Tower there, because honestly, the United Nations is not only useless, it is wildly counterproductive on every available level. And meanwhile, protesters in New York City have already gathered in favor of Maduro, according to the New York Post. These protests have been organized by the hardcore left-wing group, the People's Forum, which, wait for it, they have close ties to China. The People's Forum put out a press release saying, this war is not about drug trafficking, it's not about democracy, it's about stealing Venezuela's oil and dominating Latin America. I think one of the great interviews that I've seen recently was an interview with a person on the streets of Venezuela who's asked about this, and he said, well, hold up. I mean, Iran, Russia, China, are they here because they're looking for the recipe for arepas? Or are they also here for the oil? Like, let's be clear about how foreign relations works. Nonetheless, members of the left have been searching for an angle here. So, naturally, you have Representative Ted Lieu of California saying, this is terrible, because now that we have done this to Maduro, what's to stop China or Russia from making aggressive actions in the world? Madude, check a calendar. Russia has been taking aggressive actions since the invasion of Georgia during the Bush administration under Vladimir Putin. And what are you talking about? China has been building military islands in the middle of the Pacific. They've been threatening Philippines and Taiwan, obviously. What are you talking about? Do they need a handwritten invitation from the United States in order for them to feel emboldened or something? Like, what nonsense?
Certainly, this illegal action by the president does also take away the moral argument that the United States had against China and Russia with respect to their aggressive actions towards other places and other countries.
Give me a break. I mean, really, truly a stupid take there. Meanwhile, Sunny Hostin, who can always be trusted as a lawyer to give the best legal take over on The View, she says that the kidnapping is illegal in her humble opinion.
It's not legal to do this.
Tell people why not.
Well, it's not legal because it violates international law, right? And this sort of represents this new, I've never seen it before, for the President of the United States to kill, I believe he killed over, the U.S. government killed over 100 people, including civilians and military, in Venezuela during this kidnapping and capture. And international law doesn't allow it unless unless Congress declares war.
Violates international law. Tell us more about international law, Sunny Hostin. Representative Pat Ryan, Democrat of New York, he went after Marco Rubio, suggesting that Rubio had been deceiving Congress.
In the lead up to the war in Iraq, the same things were said about Vietnam when comparisons were made in a similar way. It is such chicken hawk BS from Rubio, who's not served a single day in uniform, to dismiss that as a phobia. You want to tell that to my friends on this bracelet that I lost in combat? You want to tell that to the innocent Iraqis that were killed? You want to tell that to the Venezuelan people who are saying, we're glad Maduro's gone, as am I, but what the heck is the plan afterwards? And are we just going to hand this to another dictator who's going to do the will of our increasingly authoritarian president in Donald Trump?
Again, the argument that somehow Rubio lied is ridiculous. What is he supposed to do? Disclose secret operations that could be blown at any moment? That is not going to happen. It never has happened in the modern history of the United States post-World War II. Meanwhile, Hakeem Jeffries, he's hanging his hat on the idea that the future of the Venezuelan people should be decided by Venezuelans. Yes, it's a step-by-step process. The first step is to get rid of the guy at the top, and then we'll move to phase B.
The future of the Venezuelan people should be determined by the Venezuelan people, not by Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, or Stephen Miller. Are you kidding me? These people don't even know how to run the United States of America.
So I do have a question here, which is Maduro was running it until 5 seconds ago. So the choices were not the Venezuelan people or Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio and President Trump. The choices were Nicolas Maduro or a transitional plan that moves toward democracy presided over by a tutelary power in the United States. Leave it to Senator John Fetterman, apparently the last sane Democrat, to just say the quiet part out loud and the obvious part, which is this is a good thing and we should salute our military for what they just did.
I think I don't know why we can't just acknowledge that it's been a good thing what's happened. I mean, I've seen the speeches from whether it's Leader Schumer or kinds of past tweets from President Biden. You know, we all wanted this man gone, and now he is gone. I think we should really appreciate exactly what happened here, and I think we did, just as I've salute our military, what they've done. That was really surgical and precise and very efficient. So why we can't celebrate these kinds of things.
Now, good for Senator Fetterman. By the way, Ana Navarro, credit to strange new respect for Ana Navarro over at The View, who occasionally, apparently, will say the right things. Here she was.
I think you can criticize and ask questions and have concerns about the way it was done and what this means in the future.
Right.
And I think you can still celebrate that this murderous, corrupt, sadistic son of a is out of Venezuela.
Yeah.
Because he has... I think there's 8 million Venezuelan exiles all over the world. People have fled from this man's tyrannical rule.
Okay, she is right about that, obviously. Okay, so the real question in all of this is, where does the United States stand? What has happened here? And something important has happened here. There's an attempt to minimize what's happened here because we don't know exactly what's going to come next. Again, you have to imagine that the pressure tactics are not over. The administration is saying that over and over, but something more important has happened here, and that is that President Trump has substantively killed the Iraq syndrome. The Iraq syndrome, the syndrome that arose in Americans' minds about our role in the world, arising from the failure of the Iraq war and subsequent occupation. So you have to go back in history to understand this. In the aftermath of the disastrous Vietnam War, America's foreign policy establishment fell into disarray. According to a lot of the experts, the Vietnam War hadn't been lost because of a combination of terrible war strategy and domestic discontent. Instead, the new conventional wisdom said, the Vietnam War never should have been fought in the first place. Not only that, but America had to fundamentally rethink its role in the world. The new conventional wisdom suggested that the U.S. should stop engaging in aggressive foreign policy in its own interests. Instead, the United States ought to pursue a more dovish or isolationist foreign policy in order to avoid quagmires. This conventional wisdom came to be known as Vietnam Syndrome. Undergirding the Vietnam Syndrome was very, very often a thinly veiled anti-Americanism, the belief that America was, in fact, not good, but a malign force on planet Earth. As former Princeton professor Richard Falk said at the time, quote, I love the Vietnam Syndrome because it was the proper redemptive path for American foreign policy to take after the Vietnam defeat. In other words, America is at root guilty, and we learned that in Vietnam, and now we ought to withdraw from the world and acknowledge our guilt. The Vietnam Syndrome in the real world came with really serious costs. As it turns out, a world without a strong America is a far worse world. An America dedicated to self-castration on the international stage ushered in the Cambodian genocide, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the rise of the Islamic Republic of Iran, among other foreign policy tragedies. Well, by the mid-'80s, Ronald Reagan had decided that it was time for America to move beyond the Vietnam Syndrome. In 1983, the Reagan administration intervened to depose a Marxist government in Grenada, a successful intervention that cost few American lives and restored that small island nation to freedom. And just a few months later, Reagan's defense secretary, a man named Caspar Weinberger, spelled out 6 standards to be met prior to a military intervention. First, a vital interest had to be at stake. Second, the United States had to be prepared for outright victory. Third, America needed to have clear political and military goals. Fourth, America had to be willing to adjust its strategy continuously. Fifth, public support had to be maintained. And sixth, all other options had to be exhausted. And the Reagan administration and the subsequent H.W. Bush administration ended the Vietnam Syndrome with the Weinberger Doctrine. In 1989, the United States intervened in Panama to arrest dictator Manuel Noriega, restoring democracy to that nation. We talked about that yesterday. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush initiated Operation Desert Storm to eject Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. That intervention was specifically designed to fulfill Caspar Weinberger's criteria. And so the Vietnam Syndrome was basically dead. And then, of course, came the Afghanistan War and the Iraq War, which revived it. Both wars began with specific missions. The Afghanistan War was designed to depose the Taliban regime and prevent the installation of another regime friendly to al-Qaeda. The Iraq War was designed to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Both of those objectives were achieved in the early going. But then, the aftermath in both countries turned into an exercise in large-scale nation building, a project that lasted years and cost over $1 trillion and cost the blood and lives of thousands of American troops. And ever since, critics of American foreign policy have basically revived the Vietnam Syndrome in the form of an Iraq Syndrome. The idea that every single conflict in which the United States is involved must become Iraq or will become Iraq. Not, contra the usual definition, a justified skepticism of intelligence findings or fear of nation building, but again, a full-scale restoration of the Vietnam Syndrome. Every single foreign policy intervention is supposed to become Iraq or Afghanistan. You hear this repeated ad nauseum from the horseshoe left and the horseshoe right. And unsurprisingly, just like with the Vietnam Syndrome, the Iraq Syndrome ushered in a period of American retreat and international chaos, led by Barack Obama and Joe Biden predominantly. Withdrawal from Iraq led to the rise of ISIS under Barack Obama. And Iranian proxies around the region grew, and that eventually resulted in the cataclysm of October 7th, 2023. Joe Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan resulted in the deaths of 13 U.S. service members and prompted, at least in part, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. China looked at the United States and the world and decided that it was going to spread its tentacles throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Well, now, on the tail end of Joe Biden's catastrophic foreign policy presidency, again, an Iraq Syndrome presidency, just as Ronald Reagan once did, President Trump has now put the Iraq Syndrome to bed. Trump has done so with what could be called the Trump Doctrine. That's a term that I defined back in November 2024 with the following criteria. 1, America's interests are paramount, and they include a lot of things, from freedom of the seas to the strength of American allies in contentious regions to, yes, oil interests. Second, America's interests must be carefully calibrated to our investment in them. So big interest means big investment. Small interest, smaller investment. Third, all measures and means necessary to achieve America's interests are on the table, from diplomacy to military interventionism. And fourth, all of this should be made very public all the time. The threat should be on the table. The threat of the gun should always be on the table. Well, President Trump has done this. Again, I said this was his doctrine in November 2024. And now, in the last year, he has done it twice. First, he did so with the June 22nd, 2025 B-2 strikes on Iran's nuclear reactor at Fordo, reestablishing America's deterrence power in the Middle East, reshaping the geopolitics of the region in dramatic fashion. Despite all of the caterwauling from his supposed allies declaring that World War III would break out because, again, they had been captured by Iraq syndrome, President Trump is not. Well, now President Trump has done the same with the ouster of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. In pursuing these actions, Trump has reestablished American deterrence globally. He's made clear America's enemies are on notice, FAFO. And he's demonstrating that such action doesn't need to lead to a quagmire or to a full-scale nation-building exercise draining America's attention and resources. Iraq syndrome should be dead, and if it is, it died at the hands of President Trump. America is indeed once again feared on the global stage, which is an incredible accomplishment given where we were just 1 year ago. This is what many of us voted for, at least those of us who actually would like to make America great again in the world. Well, meanwhile, a lot closer to home, J.D. Vance's home in Cincinnati was apparently broken into and vandalized, according to the New York Post. The deranged, hammer-wielding alleged vandal is reportedly the son of a prominent millionaire family who is, wait for it, trans-identifying. Oh, you mean that people who identify as members of the opposite sex might have other problems sometimes? I am shocked. Color me absolutely shocked. William DeFore, 26, was arrested early Monday after allegedly shattering 4 windows at Vance's home. Apparently, he was attempting to break into the home around midnight. It's unclear whether this person identifies as transgender or non-binary, but he recently appeared to be posting under the name Julia DeFore. This person, again, appears to have some serious difficulties. He is the son of a pediatric urologist, and apparently, again, a fancy family, longtime Democratic Party supporters. The reality of mental illness is quite shocking, and pretending it away, and also creating moral structures whereby if you quote unquote challenge the identity of a person who is clearly engaging in a delusion, you must be threatening them in some way, and thus counteraction is justified, which has been the sort of excuse making with regard to everything from the murder of Charlie Kirk to the assault on Covenant Catholic. Now, that entire thought process has to be ended. It has to be curtailed. The thought process is wrong, and it is damaging, and it is dangerous. In bigger news, apparently Tim Walz has now dropped out. We reported this late breaking news yesterday. According to the Wall Street Journal, Governor Tim Walz has dropped his bid for a third term amid a massive welfare fraud scandal, a remarkable fall for a politician who had ascended to the national stage in 2024 as the Democratic vice presidential nominee. Once again, it is astonishing to me that Kamala Harris chose the goofball from Minnesota, who is presiding over legitimately hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud over, for example, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, just because Shapiro happened to be Jewish. Pretty astonishing move by Kamala Harris. Worked out well for her. Senator Amy Klobuchar is seriously considering running for governor. She would be the front runner, obviously. Speaking to reporters Monday in St. Paul, Walz said it became clear to him he could not run a 2026 campaign and do the work needed to respond to the crisis. He, of course, claimed that he is a victim in all of this. Here he was. He did a press conference yesterday, at which, of course, he took no questions from the press after presiding over hundreds of millions of dollars in bilked taxpayer money. Here he was yesterday ripping the people he calls conspiracy theorists. Now, again, he can focus in on the Nick Shirley video and say that it was not substantiated well enough. But there were large-scale contemporaneous reports from CNN, from the New York Times, from Chris Rufo, from a wide variety of sources pointing out the extraordinary fraud taking place in the Somali community in Minnesota. Here is Tim Walz trying to chalk it all up to conspiracy theories. If it were that much of a conspiracy theory, my dude, you should debunk it and continue to campaign. The reality is you're a terrible governor. You never should have been a vice presidential nominee. And it just goes to show you that hanging out with Kamala Harris doesn't put much of a shine on you, as it turns out.
We've got conspiracy theorist right-wing YouTubers breaking into our daycares, demanding access to our children. We've got the President of the United States demonizing our Somali neighbors and wrongfully confiscating funds that Minnesotans rely on. It's disgusting and it's dangerous.
Yeah, well, again, this is very, very industrial scale fraud, according to the Wall Street Journal. We are talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars in fraud nationally. and certainly hundreds of millions of dollars inside the state of Minnesota, ranging from food programs built to childcare programs built. Here was Tim Walz attacking President Trump for all of this. Again, it wasn't Trump who did it, my dude. It was you. You're the governor.
I don't want to mince words here. Donald Trump and his allies in Washington and in St. Paul and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family. They've already begun trying to withhold funds that were meant to help families afford child care. And they have no intention of stopping there.
Now, again, it is not just Nick Shirley. Okay, the Minnesota Star Tribune documented more than $200 million in fraudulent meal and housing programs, Medicaid services, and more. Federal prosecutors and President Trump say that the number could be actually in the billions, and they have frozen a bunch of child care funding to Minnesota after those allegations of fraud involving daycare centers that were highlighted in Nick Shirley's video. Now, again, not everything in the Nick Shirley video is fully substantiated. Right? Some of these places presumably had kids in them, but an enormous number of them had massive violations. And again, they're still awaiting further investigation on a lot of these child care facilities. According to the Associated Press, Minnesota officials have until next week to hand over information on providers and parents who receive federal child care funds the Trump administration contends have been fraudulently used or risk losing their own federal funding. Now, there's some state officials saying that some of these places have been operating as expected, but an enormous number of them also have gigantic failures in terms of their compliance issues. Quality Learning Center, for example, as we discussed yesterday, is a childcare center that had something like 121 different problems with it over the past 3 years. Here, in fact, is the manager of Quality Learning Center who said that Nick Shirley came outside operating hours. They've been open for 8.5 years.
You don't come outside of operational hours and then say they're using taxpayer money. That was completely false. As you can see, we're open Mondays through Thursdays, 2 to 10 p.m. He was here earlier. I don't see him right now. So it's like, are you trying to record that we're doing fraud, or are you trying to put the Somali name and the fraud in the same sentence? That's what really hurt us the last couple of days. We're open. We've been open. We haven't closed. We've been open for 8.5 years now. We haven't closed once during that period.
Okay, with 121 violations in 3 years. Okay, which does raise the question of how many violations does it take to get you canceled off the welfare programs in the state of Minnesota? Meanwhile, one of these Somali-run daycare centers came out and said that they did have documents demonstrating their legitimacy, but they were broken into and stolen, which seems kind of weird why that would be the thing that a thief would steal.
Yesterday morning, I was called by the owner because unfortunately someone came in to our daycare. We looked and saw what happened, and we saw that the suspect came in from the back, broke in from the back kitchen, and he also destroyed the wall to come in. As we walked around the daycare, we saw that our office doors was broken into as well. We saw that, unfortunately, there was important documentation, enrollment of the children, and also employee documentation that was gone. There were also checkbooks that were ripped from our check papers that were ripped from our book. This is devastating news, and we don't know why this is targeting our Somali community, as one video made by a specific individual made this all happen.
Again, I have questions. Like, if you're a thief, is that the first thing you go for? Is the employment records at a daycare center? Is that really what you go for? Again, this is a major ongoing problem. The New York Times had a piece back in November 2025 titled "How Fraud Swamped Minnesota's Social Services System on Tim Walz's Watch." Walz answered 0 questions as he walked out of his presser.
Tomorrow, I'll be back with you. I'll give you an update on America's best paid family medical leave program that is now a week into it. And at that time, I'll take all your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Press. Thanks, folks. More tomorrow. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Just we'll slide out the back door without answering any questions. Well, I do not think that is the end of the Tim Walz scandal. I do not think that Tim Walz's declaration that he will not run again is going to end all of this. You might call some of this the warmth of collectivism. It turns out that when you confiscate vast amounts of taxpayer dollars and you redistribute them to all of your friends, when you regulate people to death, but then for your friends, you alleviate those regulations, you might call that the warmth of collectivism. I'm using this phrase because, of course, last week, Zohran Mamdani was officially sworn into office in New York City and gave an astonishing speech in which he announced that socialism was the order of the day in New York City. The Reds are in charge. Here he was promising the end of rugged individualism in a city about which Frank Sinatra once sang, if you make it here, you can make it anywhere. Now I guess the slogan of New York City is, if you can stay here, we'll give you free stuff on somebody else's dime until we're all bankrupt. It's a little longer and doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. Here is Mamdani talking about the warmth of collectivism, by which I assume he means the warm embrace of Big Brother. There's a great ex-post, I can't remember who put it up, talking about the actual warmth of collectivism, referring to Moscow's centralized heating system under the Soviet Union. They built this gigantic centralized heating system under Moscow in the early days of the Soviet Union, and it was utterly inefficient because it turned out they tried to set the temperature for hundreds of thousands of people. And so if it was too hot in your apartment, you opened the windows, wasting energy. And in other parts of the city, you couldn't get heat. But there was the warmth of collectivism. You did feel the collectivism. Apparently, the cost of heating in Moscow, thanks to this idiotic centralized heating system, was greater than the cost for heating all of France. So we can look forward to more of that sort of wonderful policy under Zohran Mamdani. Here he was.
And if for too long these communities have existed as distinct from one another, we will draw this city closer together. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about the death of rugged individualism in a city that is mostly famous for Wall Street. That is exciting stuff. We'll see how it works out for him, Cotton. Meanwhile, Mamdani also added that the era of big government is here, and it's here to stay. I have to admit, I'm kind of eager for this. I would love to see all the institutions of New York government be allowed to run their full course under Zohran Mamdani. I want to see what his socialist utopia looks like. I want to see all the promises that he's making made manifest. If people vote for dystopia, let them have their dystopia. Democracy is the theory that the people ought to get what they voted for good and hard. And Zohran Mamdani looks like he's ready to give it to the people of New York good and hard. And they did vote for this. And listen, I have a lot of friends living in New York. As I have suggested, come on down to Florida. Weather here's nice. Here's Mamdani.
To those who insist that the era of big government is over, hear me when I say this. No longer will City Hall hesitate to use its power to improve New Yorkers' lives.
Wow. So the era of big government is here, and City Hall is here to help. He's from the government, he's here to help, and he's going to govern as a democratic socialist, which is exciting for everyone. Again, you guys broke it, you bought it. Congrats to you. And man, look at that lineup. Oh boy. That lineup, Kathy Hochul and Tish James and AOC and some lady I don't recognize. Maybe that's Bernie's wife. And then Bernie Sanders, looking increasingly like a meme of Bernie Sanders. These are your leaders, gang. Choose your fighters, New York. Here is Mamdani.
I was elected as a democratic socialist, and I will govern as a democratic socialist. I will not abandon my principles for fear of being deemed radical. As the great senator from Vermont once said, what's radical is a system which gives so much to so few and denies so many people the basic necessities of life.
Well, I guess that he will. We'll see how that works for them. Bernie Sanders is very excited. He says, don't worry, he's not a communist. Also, everything will be free. Yes, you should definitely trust a man, the most useless man in American politics for decades upon decades. You should trust him when it comes to governance, a man who has never produced a single thing of value his entire life. His entire life, this man has never produced a single thing of worth that he's going to tell you how the greatest city on planet Earth ought to be run.
All of us have heard how Zohran's opponents have called the agenda that he campaigned on radical, communistic, in the richest country in the history of the world, making sure that people can live in affordable housing is not radical. Providing free and high-quality child care is not radical. and making sure that every family in the city, regardless of income, has access to decent, quality food at an affordable cost is not radical.
One of my favorite things about the socialists is they just declare that people should have a bunch of free stuff and it's not radical. Okay, your declaration in and of itself is quote unquote not radical. It's the things you have to do to try to effectuate that make it radical. Because it turns out the best way for people to get widespread healthcare is called capitalism, which has increased the longevity and lifespan of human beings on planet Earth by decades, while socialism has killed literally hundreds of millions of people. Why not? Free everything. In fact, free World Cup tickets. Zohran Mamdani said yesterday, I'm not even kidding, this is hysterical. He said yesterday he was going to work to ensure that everyone in New York got a free World Cup ticket. Why the hell not? Why not? Let's just do this thing, man.
I had a New Yorker the other day come up to me and ask me if there was any way I could help him get World Cup tickets, because he was saying that the cost that he saw for a game was $600, right? This is increasingly out of reach. We have made what used to be a working class game into a luxury experience. And there are too many for whom it doesn't matter where the World Cup is being played in the world. They know where they're going to watch it. It's TV. And we want to ensure that there are more experiences available.
What in the world? How? What? He's going to get everyone a free World Cup ticket. Okay. All right. Sure. Why not? Also, he's going to apparently be holding rental ripoff hearings within the first 100 days. Now, what's hilarious about all of this is that a huge percentage of New York real estate is rent controlled. One of the reasons that people are not getting the sort of services they want from their landlords is because of rent control. When you reduce the profit margin down to zero, it actually becomes ineffective for landlords to take care of their tenants. You want to know why service is really great at luxury apartments? Because people are paying an awful lot of money for the luxury apartments. So he both wants low rent forced by the government and to force the landlords to do things at loss to them. And then he's going to yell at them a lot. Man, again, New Yorkers, you did this. It was you. You were warned.
I am also proud to announce that I will be signing an executive order directing HPD to work alongside the Department of Buildings, the newly invigorated Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, and our newly created Office of Mass Engagement to hold rental ripoff hearings across all... We will hold these rental ripoff hearings across all 5 boroughs within the first 100 days of this administration. New Yorkers will be invited to participate and to share the realities that animate their daily lives. I want these hearings to expose the ugly underbelly of our city.
Man, this was so much better in the original Russian. You know, what if we just had people's courts? That'd be great. We could set up some people's courts. People could bring their landlords in, the kulaks. They could question them about their rental practices. And then if they're really, really bad, I mean, we got a wall in the back. I mean, we could make some things happen. Zohran Mamdani bringing the best of the 20th century back. Wow, this is going to be fantastic. And lest you think that I'm exaggerating the ideology of Zohran Mamdani, let's meet C. Weaver, who is now going to be in charge of the New York City office to protect tenants, which is going to be great. Let's meet her. So she says that property is a collective good. Yep. Can't imagine why so many real estate magnates I know pulled out of deals at the last minute in New York City, thinking, hey, I'm not sure I want to work in this crazy hellhole.
I think the reality is that for centuries, we've really treated property as an individualized good and not a collective good. And we are going to transitioning to treating it as a collective good and towards a model of shared equity will require that we think about it differently. And it will mean that families, especially white families, but some POC families who are homeowners as well, are going to have a different relationship to property than the one that we currently have.
A different relationship to property. That's so exciting. What will that relationship be? Well, according to her Twitter feed, which is now scrubbed, quote, I don't know why we white people keep procreating. Passing really strong rent control is a more effective way to shrink the value of real estate than reducing rezoning applications. I wish I believed in God, so I could believe that all men who take credit for women's work and all white men who take credit for the work of women of color would one day burn. This seems like a delightful person. I cannot imagine how things are going to go wrong here. Quote, this country built wealth for white people through genocide, slavery, stolen land, and labor. White supremacy built both the North and the South. In fact, private property, including and kind of especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy. That lady is in charge of tenant policy. Congrats, New York. So glad that you decided to do this. How will it possibly go wrong? Now, this sort of insane leftism is meeting its match on a horseshoe right. Now, the horseshoe right has not taken power. The horseshoe right is sort of a splinter movement inside the right. It has sort of an outsized punching weight online, but not in real life. But there is one piece I want to focus in particularly for a moment. And that is a piece called Tyrannical Centralization by a person named Curtis Yarvin. So Curtis Yarvin is widely read on sort of the fringe right. Vice President of the United States apparently has been a fan of Curtis Yarvin in the past. And he is a representative of a philosophy that is effectively a sort of right-wing fascism, a sort of right-wing response to left-wing centralization. So you have the Reds, people like Zohran Mamdani, and then you have their right-wing fascist opposition, people like Curtis Yarvin. And I'm using that terminology advisedly because in his latest piece, he basically just says the quiet part out loud, criticizing the Trump administration for not simply dismantling the American Constitution. Quote, in an American regime change, take the American version of this L. Ron Council Kabuki, Tricorn Hats, Davy Crockett, or Harriet Tubman, Declaration Constitution, even the Ancient and Holy Administrative Procedure Act of 1946, and treat it like an Arkansas miscarriage. Chuck the plastic bag out the sunroof. The possums will get to it first. Just assume the sale and act with the energy of an occupying army. Nationalize and rationalize. Quote, besides absolute power, everything else is just a way to lose. That's just where we are in history now. The energy, says Curtis Yarvin, that made Trumpism possible is the energy of this illusion breaking down and conservatives breaking free from the cult of the Constitution. He recommends the creation of a new kind of political party, which is actually an old kind of party, a hard party. A hard party, says Yarvin, is a party designed to take unconditional control of the state. A hard party is a party in which all members delegate 100% of their political energy to the party's command. Joining a hard party is a political marriage, not an election night hookup with any random politician whose name on a lawn sign catches your eye. A hard party is a legal private organization whose goal is to become the ruling party of the next government, like the CCP in China. A one-party state? Yes, we tried not having a one-party state. We ended up with a one-party state right down to the DEI commissars in every office, public or private, neglecting, of course, that President Trump has been elected. Republicans control a majority of state houses across the country. He suggests that we can't have a paramilitary 1930s-style street militia. Instead, get everybody organized on an app. You should vote at the party's direction in every election for which you are eligible. You don't need to pay attention to the names, platforms, ideas, etc. You are not even supposed to. Everyone in a hard party, says Curtis Yarvin, member, officer, donor, delegates all their political party power to the party. As a member, you vote at the party's direction in every election for which you are eligible. He says, quote, they do not need to follow the news. This would be the citizens. They do not need to read about the issues. They do not need to know about the candidates. Voting is not some time-consuming, stressful Norman Rockwell exercise of deep moral choices. They made one big vote joining the party. Eventually, they will be relieved from the duty of filling out ballots. So the reactionary right-wing response to the Zohran Mamdani communism of New York City, symbolized by the right-wing authoritarianism of Curtis Yarvin. And it is worth noting only because, again, Curtis Yarvin does have his devotees. They're mainly in the online space on the right, or people who sit around pondering whether their chair exists. At the same time, they ponder about how to establish an integralist state in America absent the Constitution of the United States. In the same way that the left ought to divide off from its communist-leaning splinter faction, the right needs to splinter off from this ridiculous neo-fascist trash. It is silly, and humoring it is incredibly silly. Not only silly, dangerous, because humoring authoritarian nonsense from people who are purportedly on your side is a great way to be co-opted by those splinter groups. Alrighty, coming up, We'll get into a pseudo controversy over Hilton hotels, which took up a lot of online space yesterday. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.